Hi, welcome back to the fourth and final video in this series. Here today we're going to do two things. We're going to run quickly through the main problems that Japanese consonants will present for you, and we're going to run quickly through a ranking, if you like, of the most important pronunciation difficulties all the way down to the least important in Japanese. Okay, Japanese consonants. I don't think any language learner or any linguist would pretend to believe that Japanese consonants were the most difficult part of the language pronunciation-wise. You might not actually be able to think of that many Japanese consonants that we don't have, more or less, in English. So the Japanese t will be a bit different to our English t, the Japanese sh type sound will be a bit different to ours. This is all true, there are always differences, but these differences are perhaps not that large and not that important. Well, okay, what consonants are there that are different to ours and that might cause us problems? We'll start at the start. Ra, ri, ru, re, ro. Okay. In English, we don't tend to use this this tapped R. If you can do it, if you're capable of going ra, ri, ru, re, ro, you'll be able to feel that your tongue tip is flapping briefly against your alveolar ridge. That's that fleshy bit just behind your teeth, right? That type of R is not commonly used in English, though it is used. Lots of people in Scotland would use that sort of R occasionally. And there are other people in other places in the British Isles who would use it. I would say great. But if you were a Scouser, if you were from Liverpool, you might say, great, was great, great. Okay, my Scouse accent isn't very good, but they have a tendency to tap these R's. Trap, trap. If you take, and this is speaking in terms of my accent, if you take an English word that begins with THR, then if your accent is like mine, you will tend to notice that you tap the R that comes after a dental fricative, which is to say, well, a voiceless dental fricative, th, throw, throw, through, through. If you say these words to yourself, you'll notice that you don't make R the normal way. It's not like saying row or borrow or marrow. There, your tongue doesn't touch your alveolar ridge. But if you say thrill, you should be able to feel a contact. So if your accent is like mine, you're already making this R sound sometimes. This is an allophone of the phoneme R, if you like. The most common allophone is the one in borrow. An allophone is just a variation of a particular phoneme. We can talk about this in more detail some other time if you're interested. Secondly, the Japanese F. Okay, the Japanese F isn't an F. F in English is a labiodental fricative, voiceless. The voiced equivalent is V, right? Not F. But the articulation is the same. What the Japanese have is a bilabial fricative. They put their lips relatively close together and go hu, hu. Sounds a bit weird when you say it in isolation. If you take Fujisan, Fujisan, which is the highest mountain in Japan, you've probably heard of it, then that is a good example of their bilabial fricative. Fujisan, Fujisan, not Fujisan, right? If you listen to Japanese people speaking English, you will often notice that they pronounce our English F as a H. This is another thing that creates a Japanese accent in English. Not the most serious contributor to a Japanese accent, but nonetheless it is some sort of contributory factor. Okay, if you look at, and this rank of the kana chart is always a bit confusing. Ha, hi, hu, he, ho, right? Now we've already spoken about hu. I don't want to talk about that one now. I want to look at hi. You will often find that this sound doesn't actually, how can I put this? Let's say it in a real word. Hito, hito, hitori, hitori. This sound is actually a voiceless palatal fricative. I just want to point out to you that this palatal fricative actually exists in English, but it's not the most common allophone, the most common version of any English phoneme. What's a four-letter word that means very big? You think about it for a moment. Right, huge. When we say huge, we're actually producing what the Japanese produce when they say hitori. If I say huge and just try and cut off the first sound I make when I say that word, huge, huge, that is a voiceless palatal fricative. Hitori, hitori, huge, huge. You actually have it in English. We just don't realize that it's there most of the time. The reason we have that sound is that when we say huge, we're effectively saying huge, but devoicing the first part of the word. The first part of the word would otherwise be the palatal approximant y, y if you like, y, y, y. When you devoice that, it turns into a fricative because of the acceleration of the airflow. And that gives us, instead of a palatal approximant, a voiceless palatal fricative, which is huge, hitori. That exists in English. Last but not least, at least in terms of the consonants we're going to be looking at here, is the somewhat infamous, perhaps, Japanese nasal This one, of course, is special. There's no other kana like this. There's no other kana that consists of a single nasal sound. This is described usually as a uvular nasal. When we make a nasal sound, we block our oral tract and we lower our soft palate. This probably won't mean much to you if you don't know much about phonetics, but you can Google it. We lower our soft palate and that allows air to flow up through our nose and out of our nose. It's not coming out of our mouth anymore. Long story short, this is quite similar to the English ng, that is a velar nasal, but the part of the tongue that's blocking the oral tract is further back. That's why we describe it as being uvular and not velar. It's similar, but it's not the same. The thing about this nasal is that it assimilates to any other sound that's being made at the same time. I didn't actually express that very well, but let me put it into a word for you. If you say genki, genki to be well or in good spirits or good cheer, that nasal isn't the uvular nasal. It assimilates to the following sound, which is a K in Romaji that is a velar stop, so the actually turns into a velar nasal. Genki. You get the same kind of thing in the English word bank. If you say ban, you can feel that your tongue touches your alveolar ridge for the N, for that sound, for that phoneme. But when you say bank, you're actually saying basically the word bang and sticking a cut on the end, if I can put it that crudely for a moment. So Japanese and English are quite similar like this. This nasal assimilates. Sometimes it's going to be the uvular nasal. Hong, hong. You can hear that nasal sounds a little bit different to anything that we have in English. This is going to take a bit of practice, especially when you have to follow it with another vowel. Kono hon o kaimashita. I'm saying hon o kaimashita. I'm not saying hon o kaimashita. Look at the kana, they're different, and they're different for a reason. This is one of the reasons why people tell you that you should learn kana if you want to learn Japanese, because they accurately capture what's going on in the Japanese sound system. And our alphabet is not really designed to do that. You have to add diacritics and other marks and things like that, and generally we don't want to do that. That's basically all that I want to say about Japanese consonants. I'm going to mention in passing that learning to devoice certain vowels is also very important. It's not hito, I've already explained that. It's hito. The first syllable there is basically devoiced completely. Ski, it's not suki. Muzukashi is fine, but it's not muzukashikute. It's muzukashikute. Muzukashikute. If you say kiku for to listen or to ask, that's not bad, but often in Japanese it's going to sound like kiku. This stuff's very important, but I don't want to talk about it too much now. Best to pick this up by listening, I think. So now we're going to zip quickly through a ranking to finish off this series of videos. Which of these phenomena are important? Well, they're all important, but which are the most important ones and which are the least important ones? So we'll go through a quick ranking. And to give the game away right at the get-go, the ranking is basically the order I presented them in. The first and most important thing is to grasp vowel durations and gemination, i.e. the insertion of small tsu in Japanese. Without that, you won't be understood, period. The second thing you want to do, and okay, this ranking is slightly artificial because you want to be working on all of these things at the same time, right? But the second thing you want to do if you want to get rid of your gaijin accent is to try and make your vowel qualities more Japanese. If you're saying watashi mo, stop it. Don't say mo. Don't say kyushu, right? That kind of thing doesn't sound right. It sounds weird, and so on and so forth. Listen to yourself. If you sound really English or Scottish or American or Australian or South African, it's mainly in your vowels. Then we have Japanese consonants, which I've spoken about a little bit in this video. You need to try and improve them basically in the ways I've described here. And last but not least, we have our old friend pitch accent. Pitch accent should be pretty far down your list of priorities on the whole in Japanese. It's something that you want to work on. I mean, if you want to split all this up into separate tasks, separate missions, then pitch accent is by no stretch of the imagination the most important mission. It's way down there on the list. You've got to get these other things right first. You want to get the segmental stuff right. That's to do with individual sounds, and then focus perhaps a bit more on the super segmental stuff like intonation and pitch accent. In practice, you'll be doing a bit of all of this stuff at the same time, and that's absolutely fine. I just want to help give you a way of thinking about this stuff to some extent. So that's it. That was just a short 4-video series on pronunciation in general, and also Japanese pronunciation more specifically, of course, is what we're talking about here. That is it. I hope that this was interesting and useful. And if you have anything that you'd like to say or anything that you'd like to ask, then by all means, whack it down below in the comments and we will take a look at it together. So thanks very much. Ciao, ciao. Bye bye.